Hello. Welcome to the Timeless Podcast, presented by Timeless Hearing, a network of audiology and hearing care professionals. We're on a mission to convince you that the best moments of your life lie ahead of you, not behind, that your spark, though wavering, can be reignited, your energy restored, and the fullness of both your love and life can be recaptured or possibly redefined. While our focus is on diagnosing and treating conditions of the ear, we believe in treating the patient beyond their audiogram in hopes of better understanding not just that patient's needs, but their motivation towards achieving a better quality of life, their support systems at home, and their beliefs around treatment and self-determination. Hearing care sits at the nexus of communication, healthcare, technology, and of course, healthy aging. Hearing healthcare is related to cognition, relational and emotional health, confident and effective gross motor movement, and of course, independence and quality of life. In fact, untreated hearing loss in midlife can lead to irreversible health declines later on. Our goal is to pre-educate patients prior to treatment, as well as drive more interest in treatment from and referrals from physicians and healthcare providers and influencers around the region. Today, we will be speaking with physician, author, and teacher Kaushal Nanavati, a distinguished healthcare leader with 28 years of experience treating patients in Central New York. Dr. Nanavati is a motivational speaker, an integrative family physician, and an author with a passion for leading people towards improved wellness, self-care, and peace in life. Kaushal believes that overall wellness is a primary means of disease prevention. He's taught end-of-life care to physicians, families, and caregivers. He currently serves as the Assistant Dean of Wellness and Director of Integrative Medicine and Survivorship at SUNY Upstate Medical University. He's an author of the acclaimed book, Core 4 for Wellness, a comprehensive guide to optimizing nutrition, physical exercise, stress management, and spiritual wellness. Kaushal, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Thank you for having me, my friend. I'm doing very well.
Great. Gosh, I have really been looking forward to having this discussion with you. We've known each other for a while now. Some of the people whose opinions I value the most in my life hold you in very high regard, and that means a lot to me. And I've seen you all over the region, especially on social media and through some of the wellness content delivered by Upstate, really doing a great job at informing the public, but in some ways sort of questioning or challenging some of the outcomes and the healthcare paradigm that are out there. And I find that to be impressive. I find it to be worthwhile and very necessary. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that. I think it's important for us to recognize that the world views prevention as a proactive step. And what we forget is that that's a two-word phrase, actually, and that in front of the word prevention is disease or problem. So it's still problem-focused thinking, right? It's focused on the potholes and trying to avoid them or prevent them or fix them. Whereas health promotion is learning how to pave the smooth road.
Right.
And so that, to me, is essential in health care and helping a mindset shift.
Right. Yeah. Healthcare versus disease care. So not all of your patients are aging. And I love to start with this general question. Some of the patients that you treat are of advanced age, but you've treated pediatric patients as well. What are some of the challenges that you see that your patients may be confronted with today that over the span of time as they grow older will increase in intensity, complexity, and the resources that might be needed to address them?
So I'll say this, philosophically, regret. As people age over time in people's lives, they tend to collect more regrets. And part of the goal is to help them not have any regrets, right? When you think about people who are younger versus people who are older, the same person and transitioning through life, what we forget is that we're actually different people. And so we can reset. A lot of people are hung up on a 6-year-old's dream when they're 40 and trying to fulfill that 6-year-old's dream, ignoring the fact that they've lived 34 years in between, right? I think my math was correct on that one, right? And so the idea is to be here now, to actually be aware of who you are today and to optimize your presence now, right? Mind, body, and spirit. So your physical health, how you take care of that, your mental and emotional, spiritual health, your financial health, your environmental, your relational health, right? These are really, really important points. And I think what we find is that as people start to get to a point where they feel like I have less time than I have to go, right, or that I've lived already, they start to reflect backwards. When people are younger, they're always looking forward.
Yeah.
And when that shift happens from looking forward to reflecting backwards, you want people to recognize that judging the past doesn't help you today, and it's not fair to the person you were then because you did the best you knew with what you knew then, right? And a lot of us say, if only. Well, how about now?
Right.
Why not now?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's almost a cliched trope to a degree, this idea that regret is living with your mind focused on the past. Anxiety or worry is living with your mind focused on the future, and trying to find some calibration to stay in the moment. And there's a lot of talk around gratitude being the number one, the keystone, whatever it might be, the first touch point to really staying in the moment is being grateful and aware. It's very difficult, I think, for people to have a perspective of the concept of time as it passes. And I recently heard this discussion, and I absolutely loved it. It floored me to a degree, that there's this idea that some people are self-interested. Well, yourself in this moment is one version of yourself a minute from now, yourself 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So if you're self-interested, well, then you should be adapting or adjusting for the passage of time and your needs over time. But that idea of someone being self-interested, I think, is more interchangeable with like impulsive, right? So it's a little bit different than this idea of who will you be at some point in the future. And at the same point, there's this anecdote that I heard probably about 6 months ago. And this gentleman was talking on a podcast somewhere, and he said, I apply this rubric that he lovingly referred to as the Stormtrooper outfit, right? And what it was is when he was 13 years old, Star Wars first came out. So he's, Gen Xer. And he wanted nothing more in the world than to have a life-sized Stormtrooper outfit that he could wear. And one day he'd be rich enough to own a Stormtrooper outfit. And so then he gets to his mid-40s. He's had some degree of success. He's got a little bit of money that he can spend. And he goes out and he buys a life-size, now adult-size Stormtrooper outfit. He puts it on. He turns around, he looks in the mirror, and he goes, what the heck am I doing? I'm living out a 13-year-old's dream as a 45-year-old man. But he clung to that desire, to that value, to that longing and that dream for that whole time. And it didn't evolve with him until it kind of slapped him in the face as to how foolish it was to be a 45-year-old man, wearing this getup. So, I mean, how does someone shift into this mindset? Time is a construct, isn't it? Right?
So that's a great point. So I always say that I have one son, but I've had 1,000. Yeah. The newborn left me for the 3-month-old, who left me for the 1-year-old. Physically, they were different. Their expression was different, right? And so I had to keep relearning these people in this transforming body. And then what I realized was that means I've been 1,000 people too. Yeah. My 10-year-old's have a life of his own. He came, he was born, and then he passed away, and the 11-year-old came, right? And so those transitions happen. And so I don't have to hold on to that 10-year-old's dream. Some of those people had great lives. Some had lives that I wish them well, and I feel sorry for them. Yeah. But the point is, none of those are me today. And so that mindset has actually helped me to help other people as well in what I do, with the recognizing that things like PTSD, trauma of the past, right? When you start to recognize that that person experienced it in that environment where I may not be now, right? If you're still in the same environment, that's something to reflect on. But, think about a soldier in war, right? My next book that I'm writing is actually called Rules of Engagement. And the idea is that in every relationship, there are rules of engagement, right? And if you understand those up front walking into it, it's much easier to navigate, right? So a soldier in the middle of a battlefield, right, has rules of engagement, and a lot of the soldiers come back with those rules of engagement embedded in their head in their personal relationships, right? So, a youngster that they're confronting in a battlefield, and then they come home and their youngster at home gets upset or screams or yells, and the reactivity is a magnified reaction consistent with the battlefield, and home is not that battlefield. Right? So helping people to recognize resetting the rules of engagement in relationships, that's very important. And violence by and against veterans, soldiers, is really high, and part of it is resetting the calibration. It's much more complex, obviously, and I don't mean to minimize the trauma, but there are ways that we can actually bring our mind back to the present and recognize, what about now? What about me right now, and how do I do that? There's a great phrase, self-care is not selfish. I'm not a believer in that phrase. It's, some of my good friends in town, have those on billboards and stuff. And what I've always said is self-care is selfish. It's good selfish. Self-care, self-love, self-respect is good selfish. Right. When you're stepping on somebody to get what you want, that's different, right? Most of us aren't selfish enough. So when you talk about self-interest, right? If you think about it, if I asked you to take out your phone right now and just instinctively tell me who would be the person? If I said, text your most meaningful relationship right now, I love you, I hate you, whatever your love language is with them, who would you text?
I mean, be family,
right?
Be my closest relationships.
Right. And the point is, you didn't say yourself.
Right.
Right. And that should be our instinct. And that's not a bad thing, because we're the only one with ourselves 24/7. Right? We're the only ones who know our deepest thoughts. Frankly, my most intimate relation, right, my wife, she doesn't know my every thought, right? Of course. We filter, right? But I know all of those thoughts, right? And so when you recognize that you're your most meaningful relationship, then you think about, how do I take care of this, right? And it brings you back. And so that kind of selfishness engenders good health. Mental, emotional, spiritual, in whatever domain that you need to be in at that time, right? Yeah. And that is essential. Today, we did a meditation in Upstate, and my focus today was on greatness. And that greatness is actually a mindset, right? So Kobe Bryant had a quote, I'm going to paraphrase it, the idea that, greatness is about overachieving your potential, right? What does that mean? That means when you feel like you can't take one more step, if you just take one more step, that's greatness.
Right.
Right? When you feel like you reach your limit and just do the one extra thing, that's greatness. And when you start to recognize that, wait a minute, I've still got something in the tank, that's greatness, right?
Right.
And when people start to believe that about themselves, what happens is they fulfill versus feeling a void.
Yeah. So it's so interesting, because I think, whether it's the battlefield or it's childhood trauma, the dynamics of dysfunctional family upbringing, a lot of people may not be able to even generate that sense of, I can't be great. What do they need? Do they need an external source? Do they need someone to tap them on the shoulder? Do they need to listen to a podcast like this, that sort of opens their mind a bit? Do they need more intense or dynamic resources and treatment? I mean, what really unlocks that ability for someone who's never thought I'm great to now say, well, I can be great or do something more than what my potential is?
So this is interesting, because you asked about different ages and stages as well. First of all, of course, they need this podcast, because, this is the best, right? But that being said, when you think about youngsters, right, they need vision. In fact, forget youngsters, everybody needs vision. So what's, the idea of a great leader? Somebody who offers clarity of vision, right? And young people, and especially somebody who's experienced trauma, who feels stuck in their domain, doesn't see a way out, they need something, some stimulus, whether it's a person, whether it's a podcast, whether it's something they've read or seen, or a thought. But the problem with the thought is, if they don't know to value the thought, right? So some sort of coaching, mentorship, guidance is very valuable, because a lot of times people otherwise feel stuck. And then the woe is me mindset comes. And then what happens is they actually rationalize all of that all the time, right? So when somebody hears it differently or gets a perspective on themselves externally to say, you know what, I see greatness in you, and here's how I see it. Where they've blocked it off because they've kind of spun a web around a thought that keeps them weighed down, right? So, yes, there's a time where we do need external. I mean, even the greatest athletes, right, the greatest minds have had some mentorship, some coaching along the way. I was once asked, I was medical director of an HMO in town, and the CEO had asked me, who are your mentors? Who's your mentor, right? And, most people would say, their father or this teacher or whomever. And what I told him was the Bhagavad Gita, the Bible, the Quran, the Old Testament, Buddhist writings. And he looked at me and said, yeah, but who? And I said, those. Yeah. The original works were crafted with a fundamental message, which I didn't even know at that time, and I've learned years since, which is this idea of understanding unconditional love being the master key. What does that mean? It means loving without expectation, right? Giving it without expectation and receiving it as is, right? And, you think about it, and my wife reminds me, that's not so easy. It's not necessarily meant to be.
Right.
But if you commit to it, your lived experience is so different. And when you apply it to yourself first, so I always say acceptance and forgiveness, right, lead to contentment and peace. And you have to start with yourself.
Yeah.
Right? And if you ask me, your only two needs in life are contentment and peace. Everything else is a want.
Yeah.
If any of your wants take away from contentment and peace, think about your priorities. And if you use those filters, right, as your decision points, you're going to make choices that engender your contentment and peace. Every fork in the road, if you choose contentment and peace, right, you're going to be creating a life rooted in your contentment and peace.
Right.
And this unconditional love, I'll give you a great example that's not in any textbook. This is an original K-Daddyism. As you know, my street name is K-Daddy. Yep. And we joke about that at Upstate. The human heart beats 86,400 to 144,000 times a day. Wow. Normal heart beats 60 to 100 beats, right? Every time the heart beats, it sends off blood. Doesn't know where it's going. Doesn't know what it's going to do. Doesn't even know if it's going to be received or not, but it keeps on giving unconditionally. And we use the symbol of the heart for love.
Right.
So it's literally giving love unconditionally. And when the blood comes back, it doesn't know where it's been. It doesn't know what it's done. It doesn't care what shape it's in. All it does, without judgment, is opens up, embraces it, nurtures it, releases again.
Yeah.
Literally receiving love unconditionally. If our heart can do that 100,000 plus times a day, how can we not be the embodiment of that?
It's beautiful when you put it that way. But isn't there some degree of, this is something that I've struggled with in my life, this balance between acceptance and achievement? And it's probably 2012, 2013 when I first started doing yoga. And I really needed it because my soul was in an interesting place, at least my mindset was. I'd been working in the corporate world for a while. I'd been climbing the corporate ladder. I'd been hyper-focused on making something of myself. And I found it to be unfulfilling in a lot of ways. Again, this story that's been told is that the trappings of success don't feel like success, and it didn't for me. And I happened to make my way into a yoga studio. I was in Denver at the time, and it's interesting when you drop into studios all over the world, I'm sure. But my experiences have been that I've found that there are yoga instructors that are young people who are athletically inclined, who've found a mode of fitness that suits them, which is amazing for them. And then you find other yoga instructors who are touched in some way. And there's something that they are conveying. There's a vibration to them. There's a knowledge to be gained. And I asked this one particular instructor who was one of the latter of the two about this idea of acceptance versus achievement. And, the answer she gave me was have a North Star, have something that you're shooting for, And that would be a more general sense of a purpose in life. But on any given day, you have to have acceptance for how much energy you have inside of your body if you're feeling down or there's something that maybe might not be allowing you to show up as your best self. Have acceptance for that. If you're coming up against obstacles that seem insurmountable, have acceptance for that without losing sight of that true North Star. And it's still something that I find myself wanting to push through things, and oftentimes pushing is not the right way to overcome, especially when you're collaborating with someone. You know, you don't want them to feel marginalized. Once you're in a relationship, you need to be, operating on a different set of principles, different rules of engagement than when you're operating independently. So that's something that's been really essential, this question for me. And if I were to always be seeking peace and contentment, I don't know that I would have the wherewithal or the wind in my sails to seek that greatness, the one more step, the one more rep, whatever it might be. So, like, where is that balance?
So that's a great question. So when you recognize that the journey is the destination, it shifts, right? Because then the joy becomes the journey, right? The other thing is the North Star. That's sort of like the 6-year-old's dream, right? You set it at the beginning of the journey. Doesn't necessarily have to be the end point. Right. So there's actually a great, two psychologists did a questionnaire, and it was great because they were looking about sustained happiness, right? And what can lead to sustained happiness. And what they found was that people whose happiness was hinged on outcomes, yo-yoed through life.
Of course.
They got what they wanted, they were happy. They didn't, they weren't.
Yeah.
People who had a sense of durable plenitude, right? That regardless of outcome, I am still good enough, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Jordan and Kobe have been quoted as, saying, you take your shot, 50-50 shots, that it's going to go in or not, right? But if you stay hung up on that, the game's still going on.
Right.
And the true joy is in playing the game. Right? Shots will fall, shots won't fall. So what you define as your outcome, what you define as achievement, right? The acceptance, if you define that as your achievement, suddenly you can experience it much more often. Right? So if contentment and peace are the achievement, right? If that's your North Star, well, then you can experience it at any moment by accepting, right? And the thing about that is, doesn't mean you don't have goals, doesn't mean you don't push yourself, right? The point is, you push yourself in the joy of the pushing yourself, not in the what that will get you, right? So what that will get you is the stumbling block for a lot of people, because that doesn't come and they stop. I don't think I can, so I won't. But in the trying, you've already taken that extra step, because I don't think I can. Well, I just did it, right? And so the idea of this mindset, right, isn't about being less than, but it's about wanting less and embracing. So you talked about time. This is a perfect example. The universe never said to measure time as seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, right? Between this moment and literally this moment is an infinite amount of time. The real question is, how are we valuing it, right? So if you think about that, we've just spent how many infinites, right? If we value this, then how this podcast comes out, right, is an afterthought. Right. But this is the experience that is the outcome that we're looking for. Yeah. Right? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it is so plastic, this concept of time and duration, right? Sometimes when you're at play in conversation or actually, doing play, performing sport, whatever it might be, there are moments that are so enjoyable that you lose all track of is this taking time? How long has it been that I've been doing this? You're just present in the moment. And then there are other times where you are so focused on the work or the purpose that time passes in an instant. What clearly is being calculated as an hour on a clock,
true.
Right?
I'll give you a perfect example, and I'll put myself out there a little bit because you talk about vulnerability and stuff as well, and I'm teasing myself. Yeah. The instant I proposed to my wife, and between my proposing and her saying yes, was like an ocean of time, right? And the last 27 years has gone by in an instant.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the example you think about. It's like, where did all this time go? And yet in that moment, it was like, what's she going to say? Is she going to say, is she going to agree? What's going to happen? Right? That kind of thing. So you're absolutely right. And I think both have value because one causes us to pause, right? And the other causes us to reflect. You made another great point earlier, which was, and I say it a little differently, most people are depressed about a past they can't go back and change, right? We talk about regret. And most people are anxious about an anticipated future, which is not even reality.
Right.
In the process, they keep missing out on the present. Our son, who's 22, at 14, he had a tumor in his leg. And we sent him off to the operating room, not knowing if he was going to come out or not, right?
Yeah.
And, my mindset was, first of all, he was giving us like peace signs, like you guys are worried about nothing. And we were just thinking, hey, listen, you little punk, you get back out here so we can kick your butt for making us go through this stuff, right? But, he could have not come out. Yeah. My mindset was, if he doesn't come out, we've had a wonderful 14 years of infinite memories. I'm going to continue to celebrate. And, if he comes out, we've got bonus time. We're going to celebrate that too, right? A week later, my wife asked me, she goes, should I have been more worried? I said, honestly, about what? Yeah. Right? We knew worst case scenario, and then everything else was an infinite amount of possibilities. Yeah. And if we sat there thinking about each of those, we would have gone stir crazy. Right? And so what you do is take what's in front of you, optimize its value, and then be practical. Right? Which is to say, if I want to go in a direction, what are the steps, right? Tiger aims for a putt. He knows where the hole is. He knows where the ball is. He finds his path, and the first thing he does comes back to the first dot to connect, right? Because if you're looking at the hole trying to putt, you can spray the ball in many directions, right? But if you come back to the first dot and connect that, at least your trajectory is now set, right? And you're much likely to get closer to goal. And so, people think about all this philosophy and some of the things I talk about and think, oh, it's nice, touchy-feely stuff. It's rooted in very fundamental, practical aspects that actually help people to have a sense of self-value, right? And when you have that, then everything else becomes secondary gain. Right?
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think worry, and for people who are either conditioned to worry, and sometimes it's the culture they've grown up in, the family dynamic, it's been modeled for them by one or both parents to worry. Many times they will justify it by saying, well, I'm just, I want to make sure that I'm keeping track of all available outcomes or something, right? And I think there is a practical scenario preparation analysis that, we should go through and just say, well, this is an available outcome to us. And if this were to happen, we're going to want to be prepared and know how to adjust and how to react. But I tend to find that people who worried only focus on the negative possible outcomes and not those, and if it is an infinite number of outcomes, well, there's probably got to be a balance in negative and positive, right? And so that to me has always seemed something that is, it's very human. I think we're probably we're the only, animals with consciousness. Well, and dolphins and elephants and pigs were very, very smart, and dogs too. I don't know that they worry. Maybe they do.
Yeah, so there's some literature on this stuff. Okay. So there are some species that actually do have that, animals who cry and that sort of thing, and, gorillas and how they take care of their young and protect and all of those instincts. So that's true. At the same time, I think your point, there's that famous adage of hope for the best, expect the worst, prepare for both. Yeah. The point is, when you hope for the best, you plan for that. Expect the worst, you plan for that too. And everything else in between is some degree of gray, right, within that, right? I won't say shades of gray, but, in some degree of gray in there, between there. Yeah. So the point is, at the end of the day, there are multiple scenarios, and being practical is recognizing, and worry is I'm in healthcare, right? Mm-hmm. We have emergency management services and all of these things, disaster plans. Oh, yeah. There's a reason why you plan for worst case scenarios. There's a reason why school districts want to make sure that the ones that are struggling, they definitely have resources for. The thing that we've gotten away from is the other end of the spectrum sometimes. And I say this for education as well. We used to have a lot of, I grew up in an inner city school district that had an accelerated program for those who were getting the material more easily, right? High achievers, whatever it may be. And so having those programs actually was good for both ends of the spectrum because you could see the potential, right, of what you can be as well. When you cut part of the equation out, now the top bar suddenly is lowered.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we want people to be motivated by achievement rather than feeling less than, right? My motto since I was a kid has been, I'm good. When there's better, I celebrate that because that's amazing because I'm good. That means they're better.
Yeah.
Right? Versus they're better, I suck. Right? Yeah. And some people have that mindset. And that's what at least the people I work with, I help them to understand, don't put it in comparison to somebody else, right? If you're going to compare yourself today to who you were yesterday and how can you be better today, right? The idea is not to, I'll be better tomorrow. It's make yourself better today compared to yesterday, right? Yeah. And you look back on a life well lived. Save for tomorrow what you can do today, and you can look back on life unfulfilled because, frankly, nobody ever lives a tomorrow.
Right.
Every day we wake up, it's today.
Of course.
How are you going to be better today, right? That's how you build in the present versus continue to dream. And, as Denzel Washington, my man, right, he's got a great quote that says, dreams are just dreams. In order to achieve your dreams, right, you have to have discipline and you have to have consistency. Because without discipline, you won't get started. And without consistency, you won't get to go.
Right.
And those are simple words.
Right.
The key to that is consistency.
Right. So there's choice and there's action wrapped up in there as well, vision. And it's really interesting. I do think that there is a lot of benefit in having a capable, respectable adversary. Right. So, there's one thing for us to just be constantly saying, I'm competing against my former self, who I was yesterday. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And I don't want to undermine it. But we live in a community. We're communal creatures. And we're always going to be bouncing our perspectives, concepts, values, sometimes gently nudging, sometimes a much more sharp collision with people around us, whether they're the people in our family, the people in our relationships, or just the people in the community in general. And I think it might be, while really useful, we don't live in a vacuum, right?
No.
So I mean, for you to have this approach, whether it was in med school or even as you were, starting on your career and looking to your colleagues and saying, well, I'm good. He's better, but I'm good. Today he's better. I'm still good because I have a sense of who I am and where I'm headed and what I'm trying to apply my effort and wherewithal and the best of my capabilities towards. But I've often found it really helpful to have whether it was in sport or in my professional life, to have someone where there was a competitive adversarial play, where I could say, I did well today, and while I'm appreciative of that, I still have a little bit left in the tank. And if I don't burn that, the other guy's going to catch me, right? And so there's got to be an interplay with other people, right? I mean, we can't take a completely insular view of ourselves, right?
So I'll tell you something. Great point. If you want an adversary, the 100, right, is your adversary. So we do things on a scale of 0 to 100. Yeah. Let 100 be your adversary. Perfection. Let that be your adversary. Because when you think about another human as being your adversary, and I say another thing, I call myself perfectly imperfect, right? Sure. I screw things up all the time. Yeah. The thing is, we're all imperfect beings, which means we're not the 100. No one of us, right? Jordan, yeah, right? Arguably the greatest. My generation would call him the greatest basketball player. I do think Bill Russell has a case to be made.
Of course.
But that being said, the point is, even there, right? That wasn't perfection. It was close, yeah, right? when I was a kid, the one thing I would say to even classmates that were competing with me, right? And I have a cousin who is brilliant and kind, and she's 3 months older, and we grew up together. And I remember, I think it was junior high, right, saying to her, and I don't know who the heck I was, but I said to her, I said, don't compete with me, right? I said, that's not the game either one of us wants to play. Compete against 100. Because what it does is sets the bar to a place. Are you ever going to get there? I don't know, right? But the point is, then you always have that as that goalpost, right? Yeah. Or that finish line, right? That you're aiming towards, or that marker that you're trying to achieve. So what happens is, then complacency isn't really there, right? At the same time, when you pair that, right, strive to be that, with the contentment and peace, the joy is in the journey, what happens is you're smiling all the way to never getting there.
Right.
What a beautiful way to live life, right? I frankly know I will not be that 100, but yo, bro, I'm going to go, and I'm going to have fun all the way through, and wherever I land, it's going to be a fun spot because I'm with myself and I like myself, right? So that whole it's a full circle psychology, which is you never stop aiming for the 100, right?
Yeah.
To be the best version of yourself is still not that. So you're going to keep going. Yeah. But if I compete with you, I compete with somebody else, right? Whether I beat you or not, it's like in school, right? If you got a 50 and you beat everybody else on the test, what did you achieve? You still failed.
Right.
Right? And you say, well, I was the best today. Son, you got a lot of work to do, right? Yeah. So frankly, keep the 100, right? And again, this is a very intense way to look at it, but if you think about the elite mindset, right? The elite mindset has always been about that. Yeah. It's never been about the other guys, right? Yeah. Because that takes care of itself when you're focused here. But if you focus there, you've already limited your potential.
It's very Vince Lombardi, gentlemen, we're going to, seek perfection knowing we'll never attain it, but we just might hit excellence, right?
Why not, right? It's like the, shoot for the moon and you might land again in the stars kind of thing. Yeah. And the reality is, if we've heard it in so many ways, right, we still need to teach it to people. Yeah. Because it's easy to do the other. Right? I beat so-and-so. I won the race. Right? I ran cross country, right? I ran track. Yeah. I played tennis, right? We did karate. Get a black belt, right? I got it faster than so-and-so. So what, right? At the end of the day, what does that matter? Have you been able to achieve your optimal self, right? And the point is that's a life's journey which helps you not to get complacent. And more importantly, it helps you to reinvent yourself because perfection is about adding all dimensions, right? Which we don't even know all dimensions in terms of our potential as a being, right? Which means you're constantly, the depth of thought, right? The depth of reflection, your spiritual awareness, your physical strength, stamina, right? When we talk about longevity, is it the years in your life or is it the life in your years? I look for the life in my years.
Of course, yeah.
Knowing time is a human construct, I've already lived infinite, right? So that longevity, that definition has already gone out the window.
Right.
So now it's about the depth, the quality of experience, right? Yeah. And optimizing that. And when you feel fulfilled, now what do? You extend it to your relationships. How does that happen? If you think about a bicycle wheel, right? All the spokes are your relationships. You're at the core of it, right? Is it easier to fix the other 50 or to fix the one?
You got to start with the one. Oh, yeah.
And that makes more sense because if you're not at contentment and peace, none of your relationships can have it because you're a part of that equation. Right. The minute you are, all of them have potential because you're a part of that equation, right? Yeah. Suddenly you've shifted it's like in backgammon, where you flip the thing and all of them flip.
Right.
You flip the one and they all flip. Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you mentioned earlier some of this ancient knowledge and wisdom. It's been written down in these different texts and was refined and iterated probably over centuries, if not millennia, before they became the works that we know today. And there is this sense, it's not quite as old as some of those texts, but in samurai culture, These were warrior artists, right, who would contemplate how to brew the perfect cup of tea or how to write the perfect verse for a poem. That there was perfection, a pursuit of perfection in any endeavor. I mean, and you talk about constructing a strong body, right, and being able to move well to attain flow in the martial art that they were pursuing. I mean, just everything had this sense of seeking perfection, which is, it's an amazing thing to think about from a westernized mindset where we accept so much without the same amount of dedication, thoughtfulness, mindfulness, restraint, commitment, dedication. I mean, those things just seem to be, we seem to have relieved ourselves of this burden of trying to be our best. And I'm not sure why or where, and I'm not sure that we can come up with an adequate answer for it. But the juxtaposition of the two ways of life seem to be about as far from each other as they possibly can be.
Well, because there was a peace in the pursuit, right? There was a joy in the journey. I can say this, in Western mindset, the outcome is what we're chasing, right? So the real key is, what are you chasing and why? We don't think about the why often enough, right? And then you think about the fact that, we want the instant fix, the instant solution. We don't want to take the steps in between, right? The, quote, fast food culture of the 80s and onwards. I think the younger generations are, at least I would say, the younger generations that we see in medical school in many ways are wiser than even my generation in what they seek. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I think, the thing that we see is that emotional intelligence, it comes with experience. It comes with having the opportunity to be able to reflect. And sometimes people are moving so fast that they don't get a chance. So if you're always chasing, you're not actually able to absorb, right? Because you're on the go. Versus actually what those guys, especially in the samurai culture and even in some of the Buddhist culture and the mindfulness and reflective culture, is when you stop chasing, you actually have greater awareness. And suddenly you recognize it's been here the whole time. Because the problem with chasing is you're looking in one direction. When you stop, you can look in all directions. Right? And suddenly it's been here. It might be right behind you, but you're going that way.
Yeah. It's fascinating how your mind works. And I've often thought of this since the day I met you. It must be, at times, an interesting dynamic for you to cohabitate and to perform your duties inside of an institutional setting, which, is usually much more rigid. To your point, working in a hospital system where you've got these protocols for emergency management, you've got all these how-to booklets, your standard operating procedures and protocols, and that many people who are drawn to an institutional workplace are much more comfortable with a black and white scenario for everything that they do. But when I hear you talk, I hear so much more of this flow of energy and so much more of this interconnectivity, so much more relaxed than rigid. So where do you find your peace being what, to me, you appear an outlier inside of something, of a monolith, which is healthcare today?
I mean, I find beauty in all of it, frankly. So we have a president, we have a CEO, we have a dean, we have several deans. I have a chair, we have faculty. We actually embrace this on a personal level. And as such, they've embraced my presence there, which is wonderful. It's heartwarming. At the same time, I left private practice because I wanted to help improve the health systems so that people I had felt when I was in private practice received care, but didn't feel cared about, right? And recently, we had a conversation with one of the physicians for the Dalai Lama, who's big on compassion. And, I tend to distinguish between empathy and compassion. Empathy is when people take on other people's burdens on their shoulders, and now we're both weighed down by them when we can't even solve their issue. Compassion is walking alongside somebody, allowing them to lean on you while they're resolving it. So I always teach my students, be compassionate always, right? Be empathetic very selectively.
Right.
And that goes for my family, it goes for my students, et cetera, right? So, I think about, there's great joy. And the fact that those who need the black and white, those are very systematic, protocol-oriented. We need them in a health system as well, because people come with different needs, right? And it's like the Lego set where different pieces fit different parts, right? And so to offer a comprehensive environment where people think differently, and that allows for people in the community to be able to connect with their mode of thinking, to connect with a system that actually offers all of it, right? So oftentimes I'll have, with your industry and what you do, I'll have an ENT refer somebody to me, or somebody who has head and neck cancer, right, come to me. I'll have somebody who's got an autoimmune condition be referred to me by a rheumatologist or an endocrinologist, hormone specialist, referring somebody to me with integrative care to actually help comprehensively, so that they're offering the science, right? They're offering the skill set they have, recognizing this person needs other dimensions addressed, right? Which I can address, right? And so that allows us to actually be a more comprehensive team, which I find fascinating. At the Cancer Center, I'm the director of the Survivorship program and the Integrative Oncology program as a family doc, right? Maybe one of 2 or 3 in the country, right? What does that do? It offers a comprehensive perspective in a cancer environment, looking at the person in the context of their mind, body, spirit, their relationships, and their community, which generally people think of cancer care as beat the cancer, right? What about the person, right? Heal the person, right? And help them live a life full of contentment and peace throughout their journey, wherever it takes them.
So I came across a video of you giving a very elegant answer for the difference between the nomenclature of alternative medicines and what you refer to as complementary medicine. So can you help our listeners clear up and maybe give a similar
Absolutely. Alternative is often what people do instead of. Not always rooted in the greatest evidence, right, or in good evidence. Complementary therapies are done in conjunction with conventional, to try to utilize all of the best information we have in different healing systems to optimize a person's health, right? Is all alternative bad? I can't say that. From the evidence-based world, you go with the best evidence. But, always remember, evidence is like the box, right? So it's the information we know. Just because there's not evidence doesn't mean that there's not other potential, right? In fact, the art of healing is so much bigger, right, than the mode of curing and the mode of evidence-based medicine. So I always say, start with the evidence. Let that be your platform. But healing comes somewhere between the evidence and what a person's goals or wishes are. And somewhere we find some common ground of value to that person in their life, right? And so that's the way I think about it. So integrative medicine is conventional plus complementary. It used to be called complementary and alternative medicine. It's really not the alternative stuff. It's more the complementary therapies in conjunction with conventional medicine to try to help. And again, at the end of the day, first, help the mindset, right? If we help a person to go from a survivor mode to a thriver mode, because survivorship, again, just like prevention, what's the word in front of survive? What did you survive, right? That's what we ask. So it's always connected to the thing you survived, the dis-ease, right? Whereas thriving is living your life beyond.
Right.
Right?
And it's interesting because it seems like it's a slippery slope, because I think it opens the door for... So the FDA exists because we lived through a period, our society did, where there were snake oil salesmen. I mean, there were people who were grinding up chalk, diluting it into water and selling it as milk, right? I mean, there's just some of the groundbreaking moments where we created these agencies to regulate how people were seeking nutrition and seeking healthcare. Right, laudanum, which was an opiate, was being used to cure all for everything. Oh, toothache, go ahead and drink some morphine. Like it took us really paring back on some of the application of some things, and maybe things went too far, and now it does feel like healthcare in general is starting to broaden its view into things that in the past have been classified as not effective or questionably effective or so inappropriate that we're going to label them with a Class A drug categorization. But it is interesting because I think there are folks who want so badly to believe in naturopathy and different types of cure-alls that they have a kidney infection and they're taping a garlic clove to their back, right? Thinking that somehow they're going to overcome this acute infection inside of their kidney.
So you don't do that?
No, I don't.
I don't either.
I haven't had the opportunity to yet, but I don't think that I would. But where do we come up with the trust for these things? Because
I think that's a great question. So there's actually a NCCIH, or National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, as a part of the NIH. Mm-hmm. And they support and sponsor a lot of information and science and research, right? So there's more research coming. The funding for that research and complementary therapies is still disproportionate when it comes to compared to pharmaceuticals. Right.
There's a commercial industry
that's exactly
that will
right.
back the research
that's
because
right.
there's an enterprise that can benefit from it.
That's exactly right. So, I think that's important. The other thing you're absolutely right is, there is very good data on some herbs, right, for certain things. Mm-hmm. And so, you lean into the data where you can. And then the beauty, and we have multiple integrative centers at major academic institutions, Upstate being one of them, where there's excellent research starting to be done to delve deeper, right? Yeah. And of course, it will take time. But, between, the major centers around the country, there are great researchers who are focused on, doing kind of first-tier research in terms of observation, case control, and then trying to get to double-blinded, randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled studies. So the research is coming, but I will say that, again, what's the goal, right? So when people are chasing naturopathy as just a separate formulary, mm-hmm. it's still the same mindset of problem-oriented thinking, right? Yeah. And the health promotion mindset for life, right, is really about how do I optimize, right, what I call the core four: my nutrition, my physical exercise, my stress management, how do I approach that, and then my sense of spiritual wellness. At the end of the day, if you're contented in peace, you've already crossed the finish line, right? So if you think about it, somebody who's 50 who passes away and they were contented in peace, we're going to celebrate that life. Mm-hmm. Look at that person. They had a great life and they died happy, contented in peace, whatever, right? Versus somebody who's 85 who's not quite achieved that, we feel badly for them. So again, what are we chasing? And there's longevity institutes, and people are talking about, I want to live longer, right? Live better, right? Live with that awareness of what does contentment and peace isn't something you figure out at 6 or 10 or 20 or 40. It's a dynamic. It changes at different stages. And so the key is coming back to reflect on, am I contented in peace? What does it look like for the near duration? 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, whatever you may want to say, right? Yeah. And then come back to it. Is this the same over the next time frame, or do I need to change something? Yeah. And if you live that way, what happens is you stop worrying about all that other stuff, right? And I'm not saying, live, die. That's not what I'm talking about. When you're ill, yes, should you be able to help your ailments and be able to heal and cure and all of those things? Of course. Right? But if you're chasing herbs and some kind of alternative treatment or complementary therapy or even conventional medications, right? So you go and eat fast food, greasy and fried, and then you take a blood pressure medicine and a cholesterol medicine, right? And then you take, a weight loss medication, right? What are you doing?
Yeah.
That's
and then anti-nausea because everything else is this cocktail you're taking is making
what are we doing as a society then? So the fundamentals were fundamental for a reason, and if we don't emphasize that as a culture in terms of policy and in terms of practice, then what's going to happen is it's an over costly system that continues to fail.
But everybody sees that, Kaushal. I mean, if we can just get
who's doing
real, no one's doing anything about it. And it reminds me of when Adolf Eichmann was being prosecuted. He was the one doing the persecuting at one point. But when he was being prosecuted, I believe he ran Auschwitz. One of the journalists who was witnessing this guy's response, which was basically, I was just doing my job. Right, I did nothing wrong. I was acting on orders. She coined this phrase, the banal of evil, right? That evil can be done when people are not thinking about the outcome of their efforts, even when the individual efforts seem innocuous. They culminate in vast moving machinery that acts very inappropriately against the humanity of people. And I see that in our healthcare industry. And if you take apart all the individual parts, the food system, the medical system itself, the for-profit insurance companies, I run an organization myself. I can imagine what's going on inside of boardrooms where they're saying, hey, we've got a real demand out there for our product. Let's try to come up with something that's going to satisfy people's hunger and need for something new, and it's going to be flashy, and it's going to stand out, compared to our competitors on the shelves. And so they make these choices that make the food more palatable, more calorie dense, more flavorful and palatable, the same thing, but able to withstand longer time on the store shelves, right? I mean, they're infused with preservatives, right? And all these different chemical formulas have all these individual worthwhile desires that they are fulfilling in the mindset of a commercial enterprise trying to put a product into market. But when you take the collective of the entire grocery store being filled with what some people would characterize as carcinogenic or poisonous nutritional elements. Unhealthy, sure. And there's no one stopping to say, we shouldn't do this anymore.
So I will give you a little good pushback on that, which is to say there's a lot that's changed in the last 15 years on that front, in a good way. Integrative medicine, the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, its predecessor organization. And there's a lady, Mimi Guarneri, who's been a leader for a long time from Southern California. They actually went to work with the Department of Defense. And so the VA's health system has actually embraced integrative medicine and around the country. And they're actually probably the biggest supporter of integrative health, which incorporates lifestyle medicine. Recently, partly because health systems have focused on prevention, health management, and innovation. There's an Academy of Lifestyle Medicine that's sprouted, and now these guys are fundamentally focusing on making lifestyle the focus of the care they provide. Right? That's a big change in the right direction at a national and international level. When technically speaking, all good doctoring should incorporate that.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
And, in medical schools, nutrition is becoming bigger. There's a whole teaching kitchen collaborative amongst medical institutions to teach students about culinary medicine, about nutrition, about the fundamentals of what should be happening in homes when they're not in our offices, to try to maintain and improve upon the health of the people, right? But clearly, cost, is an issue. Access is an issue, right? Culture, subcultures are an issue. So there are multiple layers that we have to work with. And again, the joy is in the journey, which is to say, people better than me, right? I'm good. People better than me, as I said before, have been working around the country in bigger cities, working with bigger organizations to improve access, right? To improve the education, right? Doing something like what we're doing today, right? And the millions of people that this is going to reach is all positive because they're going to hear this message. And so the more consistent we are with getting this message out, it makes a big difference. I think social media is a game changer. I think people of generations ahead of us haven't quite mastered use of current attention grabbers to get the right message out, right? So, everything you do, 90% is marketing, right? Yeah. If you market the right message consistently enough, what's going to happen is that's going to start to seep into the culture, but it has to be consistent. Right. There are some great people who have put a lot of years in. Dean Ornish is another example, right? He's, for 20 plus years, worked on the DASH diet, which helps with hypertension, to the point where it's actually now a program that the government pays for in terms of Medicare, et cetera, pays for people to get training in medical environments, right? So it's not to say that people haven't pushed. I always like to say that if you make your surge bigger than the tidal wave you're facing, you can calm it right down. Otherwise, you're going to get smacked in the face. And the goal is to make this surge grow to the point where that becomes a tidal wave that can't be overcome, so that culture shifts.
Right. It's just so interesting to me because I think that there's, I don't want to say finger pointing because that's not the right phrasing, but there's a lack of accountability, where I feel like the answer, and I can't say that it's directly from anyone, but it feels as if it exists within the medical community to say that our patients don't want to do the hard things. They don't want to make lifestyle changes. They don't want to sit down and meditate and find some spiritual guidance. They don't want to make these different nutritional choices. They don't want to exercise, that's for sure. What they want is a pharmacological or surgical intervention that's going to take the pain that they're feeling right now away. And what we see with things like bariatric surgery, even like orthopedic surgeries, they have a low probability of immediate success and an even lower probability of sustained success over time. People with bariatric surgery gain the weight back at a 25, 35% clip, sometimes even more, I'm sure. People who have their backs operated on or their knees operated on ultimately end up feeling even more pain, get a second knee surgery later on in life. And it just feels as if the healthcare industry says our patients won't do the hard work, and the patients say, well, my doctor told me to get this surgery. And there's nobody standing up and saying, well, hey, we're all acting crazy here. It's nutritional literacy, it's healthcare literacy. But then there is this collective coming to terms with the fact that we've allowed the sense of what the way things ought to be has really, we've collectively allowed it to erode, like the sense of what does a healthy 45-year-old look like, right? I'm constantly told that I look really young. And I look at some of my classmates from high school, and they are 70 plus pounds heavier than I am. And I'm not sure that it's a genetic thing. I'm not sure that it's an environmental thing. I'm not sure that it's a lifestyle thing. I just listened to this fantastic piece by, his name's escaping me, but the gentleman who did this recent Netflix series on blue zones. Oh, yeah.
Dan Buettner.
Buettner, exactly. Yeah. And he believes that environment, genes is about 20% of your longevity, but then the next largest variable is your environment. If you live in these, communities where you're near the water, the access to the food you have is very healthy, the relationships and the communities you're in are all collective minded, that's going to help you live longer. I don't know. From a core 4 standpoint, what is the lowest hanging fruit, or does someone have to move each one of those dials forward at the same time to start to recapture some sense of well-being?
So I'll give you the cop-out answer, which is it's variable.
Oh, sure.
It's also the right answer. Each individual has different domains that affect them differently at different stages of their life, right? And, you know, the live to 100, the longevity piece and all of that stuff, fundamentally, and there were so many concepts in there that were about, you know, finding your purpose, right? Meaningful relationships, finding your tribe, you know, live to 80%, the Harahachibu principle, right? Ikigai and the principle of that, right? Which is finding that balance for yourself, right? And then the contentment piece, right? The pausing, right? The sitting, the sharing the meal with people, right? These are all concepts that when you think about it in our day-to-day life, how often are we consistent with that? We're not, right? You know, you use the word we, which is the right word. And even at work, I often say, you know, there's no them and us. It's we. We've created this system. If we take ownership of it as a collective, then we can change it. And I believe, like at our institution where we have over 11,000 employees, each one is a leader. Yeah. Forget the potential to be. We all are leaders in the domain. And if we actually have that mindset, what happens is we're willing to push the cart forward versus sitting waiting for somebody else to move it forward, right? Socially, there's a lot that needs to improve. And again, if we don't want it to and we're contented with it, whole different ballgame. Yeah. But we're not. Yeah, right? As a society, we're not.
Not at all.
Right?
Yeah.
And so because we're not, we have to figure out what does that contentment and peace actually mean, right? And it does have to come from, quote, leadership, people at the table where change is made, right? Policy drives behavior, right? So, you know, I always tease my son, he studied health management and policy, and he went on the management side. I say, you know, the policy makers actually define how the managers behave because they make the policies the managers have to follow.
Absolutely.
Right? So if we want to have broader change, and it's global at this point, it's not even just us because our behavior dictates behavior by others and others, you know, behaviors and resources dictate our behavior.
Absolutely.
You know, on the global scale, what are we prioritizing, right? And ultimately, what's the goal? There's not clarity. No. Right? There's not consistency. And so if you don't have those things, what direction are you going in if all the horses are moving in different directions, right? You're not moving anywhere. So ultimately, there has to be this sense of urgency, which is very important. I just heard while I was driving here, I heard on the radio somebody went to a 3 Michelin star restaurant in New York City where there was only one sign on the wall in the whole restaurant. It was, you know, sense of urgency, right? And the point was everyone there should have a sense of urgency to provide the best they can and to be the best they can be. Yeah. If we live with that mindset, things change. Now, can you and I change the whole world in an instant, right? No. Can we affect our own behavior? Absolutely. Then can we be that model? Today I gave somebody an example. I said, you know, here's the thing. If you're the lighthouse, right, then you will not experience darkness because you're the light, right? And oftentimes what we do is we take on other people's problems, and now we're both out to sea without a paddle, right? It's better to be the lighthouse for somebody so they can find their way back, right? And so that's being the model of behavior. And again, I say live by the 90-10 rule. You do it right 90% of the time, the 10% your body can handle, right? Yeah. Harahachibu is 80-20, but I always think because we're human, gravity pulls us down a little bit, so you aim for 90-10, you end up at 80-20.
I like that.
Right? And that's about the fact that you're not gonna be perfect, like we talked about earlier, but aim for it, right? Strive for it with a smile. Don't strive for it with begrudgment. Yeah. Because then if you're begrudging the fact that, you know what, they screwed it up for generations now, I got to go fix it, that's not a mindset that gets you anywhere. Yeah. But if you say, you know what, I've got this opportunity, right? It's either a challenge or a problem I'm facing or it's an opportunity that I'm creating. Yeah. Suddenly, you have joy in the process. And my former chair used to tell me, he goes, I don't know if you'll ever achieve everything you want to, but I guess I'd rather fall forward than fall backwards. Yeah. I don't mind falling forward and exiting stage left when it's my time.
Yeah. And do you have to find contentment in resistance as well? Because I think what I see sometimes happens with change makers, with the outliers, with the folks that are trying to change, and they're delivering a message that is rational, logical, evidence-based, and there's an inertia in the status quo, right? And there's even like sometimes an immunological response to the status quo being challenged, where it lashes back out, it counter attacks, and there are people with great messages who, throughout their life, their passion for change becomes resentment to the resistance, and eventually becomes very emotional and almost problematic to their own cause. So how have you remained so placid in your approach when I'm sure you're seeing patients walk through the door where it's like, I'm not the one to heal you. You're the one to heal you. I want to unlock a couple things, awareness within you so that you can heal yourself. But, I didn't cause the problem. I can't fix the problem by snapping my fingers, but let's have a really engaging conversation.
Even a gentle stream can smooth a rock over time and the sharp edges, right? Yeah. So my rule of negotiation, right? I'm giving away my, key here.
All your trade secrets.
I'm telling you. My rule of negotiation is when no is not an option, wonderful possibilities emerge.
Yeah.
Right? No comes off the table, right? There can be resistance. We can do it anyway, right? There are 1,000 ways to achieve the goal, right? The journey can take many paths to your North Star, right? Yeah. At the end of the day, if that North Star is immutable, we'll figure out a path that works for everybody, right? Yeah. Optimal. Now, it may work 80% for you, 80% for me, 70% for somebody else, but listen, we've found common ground, right?
Right.
And so the concept and my general rule of negotiating is high, mid, low, right? Or we walk. Now, this is home, right? I've had many opportunities to leave Central New York, to go to warmer places, beachside places, etc., eminent locations. This is home. Yeah. So at least while we're here, why not leave home better? And so with that mission, I always tell our employees, when you come here, right, if you have a point to make, remember, you represent the 300,000 plus Central New Yorkers. And that gives me a lot of gravitas to share the message because I don't represent me. Yeah. I represent all of the Central New Yorkers. And we are worth it, right? You deserve what you get. Get what you're worth. Our people are worth the best health care, right? Mm-hmm. And there's no reason why we can't have it, right? And so with that as my motivation every morning, how do I not come in with a smile and represent the best for the 300,000 plus homies that I got in Central New York, right?
Yeah. And this idea that when no is no longer an option, you got endless possibilities, it sounds beautiful. And I think it's rooted in this sense that desperation and suffering are really powerful motivators, right? Where you can only get better. Like, you can't get any more sick, right? You can only get better. Let's figure out how to get that journey started. But in order for that person to be with their back against the wall at rock bottom, whatever the, analogy is, there's a lot of pain and suffering that goes into that. How do we get people before they're at the end of their rope to start making these subtle, I had a guest a few weeks ago who said shameful changes. Shameful how small these edits can be that can be meaningful to your life.
I think you have to share stories. I think you have to connect. I'll give you a couple of examples. I had one gentleman in his 80s with stage 4 throat cancer who came to me, and I said, what did they tell you about me? And he said, well, they told me you helped me feel better. Right? And I said, what's going on? And he said, well, every day I wake up and I feel like it's Groundhog's Day. I have the same thought in my head again and again every single day. And he was with his wife. And I said, well, what's that thought? And he goes, every day I wake up and, I feel like this is the worst possible day. That's his first thought, right? Now, most people would have the reaction you just had, like, oh, that's too bad. Yeah. My eyes lit up. I was like, oh, my gosh. I said, you've just blown my mind. I said, this is some of the greatest wisdom I've heard in a long time, right? So he looked at me puzzled. His wife looked at me and said, he just said it's the worst possible day. Where are you going with this? I said, just bear with me. I said, I'm still trying to get my bearings. I mean, this is amazing. Yeah. I said, if you wake up and it's the worst possible day, You got the rest of the day to make it better.
Yeah.
I said, you smile once is better than the worst possible day. I looked at his wife and I said, you hug this beautiful lady, you got 2-3 hours of joy at least, right? And again, having done this for 20 years, and we had exchanged life stories at first, so we were comfortable. I looked at his wife and I said, if you walk by him and just pinch him on the backside, I bet you he's going to be smiling for days, right? And they both laughed. Yeah. And he looked at me and goes, now I know why they sent me to you. Yeah. And I said, we're 3 minutes into an hour-long consultation. Yeah. You got anything else for me? And he looked at me and he goes, you just shifted my whole mindset. Yeah. He said, I know exactly what I'm going to do when I go home and how I'm going to look at my life. And he looked at his wife and he goes, I know what she's going to do when we go home, right? Yeah. And the point is connecting with people, right, to share. And sharing these stories helps others to then reflect on their own life, right? Too often people are stuck in their own story, and perspective helps change things. So that's why being out. Why do I like to get out in the community? You said, you've seen me all over the community. Yep. Why do I like to get out there? Because people need to hear this side of the message as well. Yeah. The proactive health promotion piece versus, get your cancer screening, which is very important. Mm-hmm. That's the prevention piece, right? Yep. Get your blood pressure checked, get your sugar checked, get your metrics checked, right? That's all very important, right? Eat your broccoli is a message that should come first. Yeah. I'm known as the broccoli guy. People stop me at Upstate, right? Honestly. And they'll say, hey, Doc, yeah, you're the broccoli guy, right? I'm like, yeah, because I had my broccoli today. I'm so happy for you.
High five.
Right?
Yeah.
So the fact that now brand recognition is there with broccoli, right? What does that do? That means people are thinking about it. People go to the grocery store, they see that thing, and they connect. Yep. Right? So, again, marketing the message is one of the most important. I had one other lady who rode horses for a living, and she had a brain tumor. She had surgery, and then it came back. Second time, she woke up, and her left arm didn't work. So she came to see me for an integrative consult, and I said, what did they tell you about me? And she goes, they told me you'll get me my arm back. Like, bro, I ain't no miracle worker, right? But, she was serious because she rode horses, and she was left-handed. And so I said, well, as we sit here, your left arm doesn't work. I said, worst case scenario, it's not going to work. And I said, we don't ask children what they want to be when they grow up anymore. We ask them what they want their purpose to be, what they want their meaningful contribution to be. So I'm going to ask you the same questions, and you can reflect on them when you go home and tell me next time. But in the meantime, I'm going to share a story of 2 Olympic athletes, right? Both want the gold. One feels like second place for losers, right? And so zones out like LeBron, shuts off the cell phone, like LeBron during playoffs, and trains. Goes to the Olympics, doesn't make friends, just trains on their schedule, gets to the starting line of their race, doesn't look left or right, just at the finish line. Visualizes winning. Gun goes off and they run. Run the race of their life. They cross the finish line, they look up, PR, personal best, second place. They've had a miserable time all the way through, right?
Isolated, alone.
Yeah, versus Usain Bolt, somebody like Usain Bolt, dancing with kids on the beach, doing commercials, gets the Olympics, makes friends with people from different cultures. At the starting line, he's signing autographs for his competitors and looking in the stands, not for the fans, but where the cameras are, so he knows how to pose when he's running. Right? And this dude's had fun all the way through. Yeah. And so what I explained to her was when you start from rejecting the present, wanting something different, nothing in between is good enough. When you start from accepting the present, wanting something different, every little gain can be a celebration, right? Same journey, but one is one that's filled with celebration, and the other is wrought with anxiety, right? And so so as I told her that, she goes, all right, just stop. You're a good talker. I get it, right? She said, I figured it out. I said, what'd you figure out? She goes, well, the questions you asked me. I said, really? She goes, yeah. She said, I still want my arm back. And I said, I hear you. She goes, but in the meantime, I can at least walk the horses for children with cancer with my right arm and help them. Yeah. She never had to come back and see me again. She found her purpose. And sharing these stories helps people get perspective on what can I do versus what I can't do, right? How can I be versus what I can't be, right? Who I was and wanting that back. A lot of people will come to me and say, I want to be right back where I was 10 years ago. And I tell them, you can't. Yeah. You won't ever. Like, what do you mean? What kind of doctor are you? I said, I'm being very real. You're going to be the best version of yourself today, but do you know who you are? Let's start there, right? That's a different mindset, right? It's a different mindset. So it helps people to recognize that we have opportunity all around us, right, to give And, what they say is the best way to find your purpose is to lose yourself in the service of others, right? And the more you do that, the more you're actually serving yourself, because right now when you smile at me, I feel good, right? I know my hair is messed up, but I'm just saying, right? And so the point is, there's opportunity all around us. People get lost.
Yeah.
And I think the message needs to be given consistently, not just by doctors, by people in community, people in households, right? Parents to children. You asked me about youngsters and older people. We got to work on both ends of the spectrum, right? Helping people to achieve contentment and peace in life at the later stages, helping people to recognize purpose and meaningful contribution throughout their lifetime.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me because you're triggering this thought about something that we do in our clinics. I think a lot of our patients, and maybe people from the outside, think that our treatment begins after we've diagnosed someone with a hearing condition. We've identified the proper adaptations that we want to apply. We've gone ahead and applied it, and we're in a rehabilitative process. We tend to think that healing, or at least treatment, begins during the initial consultation. Even just the first questions we're asking, very much what you've described. And to a lesser extent, the way that we've engineered the space. We want people to walk in and to immediately feel at ease. But we had this very heart-wrenching case just about a month ago where a family came in, and this 13-year-old girl had been all over Western and Central New York, Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, to see specialists about the symptoms that she was having. And she just kept being counseled that we really need to tell you about proper expectations here. This is something you're going to live with for the rest of your life, and you're just going to have to get used to it. And when she walked through our door and her parents walked through our door, they were all defeated. And this was like a last-ditch effort. And the first thing that our clinical doctorate said to her was, let me tell you all the ways that I can help. And the three of them, almost simultaneously, their shoulders all softened. And, there's tears welling up in her dad's eyes, and there's hope there again. And it's one of those moments where we hadn't even, done any testing yet. We hadn't applied any of the treatment, classical treatment. It was this recognition of the humanity and the journey that they'd been on, and this sense of you're going to be helped here no matter what. It's very humanistic. And it sounds like there's that in your approach, but it sounds like you mentioned a little bit earlier that some of the generation that's coming up behind you is recognizing that human connection needs to be part of their practice. Is that what you're saying?
Very important. It's very important. So, it's a great point you make, because here are the ways I can help you, right? So, oftentimes people will hear when they go to a, medical environment, there's nothing more I can do for you, right? That's just not true. You can smile, you can hold a hand, you can give a hug, you can share a moment of silence, right? There are so many things that you can do, and people will push back and say, yeah, but, that's in the moment. Then they still have to go home and, I don't want to give false hope, right? There's no such thing when you're offering a person an opportunity to have a good moment, right? That may be their last good moment. We don't know. We don't control that, right? We don't control the outcome. We control our input. And if our input is, a negative tone, or one that is affording a person a mindset that's going to invite more stress, that's not really healing at that point, right? And when you can't cure, you can still help people heal. So, I tend to refer to myself and a lot of what we do as healing, right? And that I'm a healer. You think about shamans, right? In other cultures, indigenous cultures, etc. And shamans often did their healing by helping people to find themselves, to accept themselves, to embrace themselves, to acknowledge the limitation of their physical presence or the finite nature of it. And all of that can be celebrated, right? I always tell people who are religious, when you pass away, if you're going to go to heaven, how is that a negative thing, right? So then why are you fearing it, right? I have I'll share this. I think you can see what you want to do with this. I had a lady who was in her 70s who came to me very worried that she was going to go to hell. And, she had some experiences in life that she didn't feel proud of. So she was really worried, and that was her stress of the day. And so I said, oh, really? I said, because I know I'm going to hell. And she looked at me and she goes, what? How can you say that? I said, because think about why souls end up in hell. To get polished, so when they get to heaven, they're spick and span clean, right? Yeah. I said, so I want that devil to do a great job of polishing me up so I'm perfectly ready to present myself to God. Yeah. Right? And I said, by the way, he was a fallen angel. Maybe you're meant to go there to remind him he needs to come back up with you. Yeah. She goes, I'm 70-something years old, and, I've gone to church all my life. Nobody's ever explained them to me this way. Yeah. Right? Another lady in her 70s said, I feel the weight of, Jesus walking with the cross, bearing the cross and the weight and the burden that he must have felt then. I said, that's very interesting. I said, because I think in the moment Jesus was feeling love. The people were seeing a burden, but he was feeling love. So if you want to feel what he was feeling, you should feel love. Mm-hmm. And she goes, no, nobody in church has ever explained, that moment to me that way. And I said, well, because you have to understand, don't just look at the surface. Right. And that's what most experiences in life. When we look at the surface of it, we may see pain, we may see trauma. What we're not realizing is in the journey of that being, right? Some of these things that we see that we want to cut off, right, and stop are a part of transformation. Yeah. And sometimes, we want to help people realize what the outcome potential is, right? I've had patients who have cancer tell me it was the best gift they ever got. Yeah. Right? You've heard this before, right? Absolutely. And so we sit there, and the oncology team may say, well, we need to, the war is to beat the cancer, right? But frankly, for that person, it shifted their whole living experience. They actually found more joy. Right. They may not, quote, live as long, but none of us have a guarantee of tomorrow anyway. Right. So who's promised to tomorrow? Nobody. Right?
But that next phase of their life will be lived differently because of the different perspective.
Absolutely. Right? And suddenly, they're happier. Yeah. And you're like, but you have cancer. Yeah, but I'm happier.
So it's really interesting because there's so much variability in outcomes. We can talk specifically about cancer treatments. And it does appear that there is, it doesn't just have to be cancer. We can talk about something else if it comes to mind. But it appears to be the framework, the mental framework that the patient is using in which they will accept treatment and how that treatment will do its work inside of their body, leads to variable outcomes, right? There are people for whom they take so this placebo effect is something Deepak talks about, right? That in any clinical trial, there's this 4 to 6% effect where the placebo, the patients who received the test subjects is probably the better term, who received the placebo will have the same effect as the people who receive the actual molecule, right? So if it's a test on antibiotics, still have an antibiotic effect. If it's a test on a cancer drug, they'll have that effect, that the mind actually converts that inert sham medicine into the actual medicine. And then there are people who receive the actual treatment who have zero response whatsoever, right? And there seems to be this sense of the belief that this will help me that allows the medicine to do its job. And that seems to be like the baseline. And then above that are these degrees of, I can be healed through this. I'm worthy of being healed through this. And once I'm healed from this, my life will be different because of it. And this self-actualization, self-determination, this belief structure that you're kind of helping through this reframing before they even start treatment seems to have an impact on efficacy. And, how one, can we and should we even try to explain some of this? But also, how do we propagate it more?
Well, the question then comes to mind is, so what does actually being healed mean?
Yeah.
Right? Is healed getting rid of the ailment? Is healed contentment and peace? Mm-hmm. Right? And if healed is contentment and peace, right, then it's a whole different goal. So part of it is understanding what does a person actually consider to be healed, right? That's an important definition, actually. Cure, we can say getting rid of the ailment, right? Healing is a whole different thing altogether, because healing can incorporate cure or not, right? But the power of a thought and the impact of that ripple, right, is infinite, right? And so to your point about discussing, placebos and the mind, all of the psychology that goes with it, comes down to two fundamentals when you consider the impact of especially chronic disease, cancer being one of them, heart disease, lung disease, arthritis, inflammation, and the gut microbiome, right, are fundamental, gut dysbiosis, are fundamental to development of chronic disease over time. We, at least in integrative medicine, we think of those as the root causal factors. Right. If you think of older healing systems, what they would do when people were ill was first, they would purge the gut, right? Okay. Yeah. Either way, right? Yep. And then they would repopulate the gut microbiome with, yogurt-based, right? Fermented foods, pickled food, prebiotic, probiotic, terms that we use now that everybody understands, right. Raw, cooked, pickled vegetables, etc., making soups and, brothy things, etc., to help repopulate their gut, and then see what was left over, and then use medicinals.
Start there.
Right?
Yeah.
So it was about the foundation. And so what we're realizing is in helping people to heal, on the one end, it's the mindset, which is redefine contentment and peace with current context. Yeah. You have cancer. How will you live a content and peaceful life with cancer? Right? What does that mean for you? Right? Does that mean traveling twice a year? Does that mean getting your workouts in? Right? Does that mean eating healthier, spending time with your grandchildren? Whatever it means for you, right? Mm-hmm. Get clarity, because then you're more likely to achieve it. Most people don't think about that stuff. Right. So getting them to proactively think about it, right? That's the mindset part of it. Then comes the physical side of things, right? What does healing mean for you? Well, I want to be able to have better quality of sleep, right? I don't want to feel nauseous, right? I want to have energy, right? I want to be able to write. Whatever it is, right?
I want to be able to bend over.
Bend over, exactly. So whatever those things are, the more clear you are with what that means, the more likely we have potential to actually help. Right. If those conversations don't happen, then what happens? Well, we'll treat you, see what happens. Right. Nobody's thought about anything. Yeah. Right? So getting people to be very clear actually helps them to focus in the right spaces, and that they're already on their journey to healing.
Right. Well, it's like, a GPS is useless if you never type in a destination.
Right. And then what does it do? When there's traffic, it finds a different way. Yeah. So the approach may change. Right? Don't be married to one way, right, and don't be married to one destination, right? Embrace the journey and find the joy in it. And in fact, the way you find it is by creating it. Being the lighthouse, you don't have to worry about finding the light. Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. So if we kind of understand, when healing begins at this initial realization of peace and contentment, and then journeying towards that, I mean, is that where illness begins, is when you lose peace and contentment? I mean, you talk about the gut microbiome, and there's clinical evidence that points to worry, anxiety, stress accumulating and impacting the way that we even extract nutrition out of the food that we eat, right? I mean, we have, this good idea of the way that serotonin works, intracranially. But there's free serotonin in the gut as well, that is very much playing this role in mood modulation. And I think 90% of serotonin is made in the gut, right? Outside of a little different, but still serotonin. Yeah. So it's fascinating. So if someone, and you know this much better than I do, but every chronic disease
degenerative disease has a pre-symptomatic phase, right? No symptoms. There's something going on there that's a brewing. And I mean, is it right to conceptually think that if you've lived this uncontent life, you don't have peace, you get a cancer diagnosis at 48, at 72, whatever it might be, that in some ways you've had illness and disease your entire life, and it's just finally manifested in this way.
Right? It can manifest in many ways.
Yeah.
Some people have depression. Some people have high blood pressure. Some people have just this idea that I'm not well, right? Whatever it may be. So it's definitely, there's this graph that we learn throughout our schooling where, something is brewing under the surface, but we don't have any way of detecting it or even sensing it internally until it gets to a certain threshold.
Right.
And then you have this window of time where you might feel symptoms or we have biomarkers and all that stuff where we can actually do something to change the trajectory, course correct, right? And then you get to a certain point beyond which we can't course correct, and then it kind of has its own inertia, and then, we get to this, we don't have a cure, right, kind of a thing. Throughout that whole process, the win, if you want to call it that, is the mindset shift, right? Which is recognizing, embracing, optimizing, right, in the value of the moment. And it is requiring of discipline and of consistent approach to being, right? So we had actually, it was a sad incident. I had one of our deans in the College of Health Professions, was a really good friend and a mentor. We were speaking, and she was telling me about a young couple, someone who had graduated, and he'd gotten married. And 3 months into their marriage, they had a car accident, and they passed away. And so a very sad thing, right? My instinctive response was, I'm so glad they had the time.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she goes, I don't know anybody else who would have that initial response to what I just said, right? But that's my mindset.
Yeah.
And how has that been that way over time? And it's not that I haven't experienced trauma, but what I realized is, do I want to stay in that mindset, or do I want to celebrate the value of, or live in the loss of?
Right.
And when you celebrate the value of having an experience versus the loss of not getting it again, right? My dad passed away last year of appendix cancer, right? And I've celebrated his life. In fact, after he passed, we did the funeral, and my older cousin sister took me out for a walk, right? She goes, let's go for a walk. Now, the two of us don't just go for a walk. So I was like, all right, what's going on?
Yeah.
And she goes, well, my aunt, your mom, or my mom, her aunt, is concerned because you haven't cried. And so she feels like you're holding it in. And I say, I'm actually celebrating his life. I'm happy for him that he's at peace now, right? And when you have that mindset, and this was, my role model growing up, the guy who taught me about life philosophy and all that stuff, I'm celebrating him.
Yeah.
Why do I want to feel a loss when I have infinite memories?
Yeah. It's interesting, and I am sorry to hear that. I've lost my dad as well, and I lost my dad in 2011. And at times, and quite frequently through our life together, we had a strained relationship. But what I like about my relationship with him now, and it's been 12, 13 years, is our relationship has never been better. It's like every time I think about him, I see him smiling. I think about his sense of humor. I think about, those moments when he was proud of me, those moments when I did something that I thought would really please him. And those are the things I focus on. I'm aware of the stressful anxiety that in the rift that was between us at times, but it's not something that I want to focus on. And it's interesting. It's a framework that's unique to me, and it's something that I choose actively. But it's something that I'm really grateful for.
Yeah. We didn't see eye to eye on a lot of stuff, right? But we made peace with the fact that we were different, right? And we didn't have necessarily the same philosophy and everything, right? That was okay. And now, you look back at some of even the rifts, as you say, and some of those moments of, that were not the most joyful, right? Mm-hmm. And you smile that you had them.
Yeah.
Because they taught you a lot about how you are today. And some choices you make because you admired what they did. Some choices you make to not be because of what they did, right? And it helps us to be human in that way. It helps us to grow in that way. And then we think about our next generations and how we want to help embrace their journey, right? And at the same time, what I've learned is rather than me, it's like, you sow a seed and then you water it and you nurture it. Now, as it grows, you want it to go a certain way towards the light. That's not fair. It's got its own natural flow, right? Yeah. Why not celebrate that, right? There's a classic saying that if all you're looking for a rose, you might miss out on the beauty of a tulip, right?
Yeah.
And so I've learned that, with my son. And he's been probably one of my greatest teachers because he would question. In fact, my best friend from college, who is out in Seattle as an oculoplastic surgeon, when we were in college, I would say, well, this is our tradition. He's like, well, it's your parents' tradition. Every generation, has their own tradition. There are some things that come through, but, you need to understand the why. You can't just say because it's tradition or just because that's the way it is. And this guy lives out in Seattle and has probably helped me parent my son more just with him in my head, right? And it just so happens, and I'll give him a shout out, AJ, just so happens his first child was born on the same day as my son 15 years later.
Oh, no kidding.
Right?
Yeah.
So we sit there going, we call each other brothers. These two actually are born on the same day. And, you never know what nature does and how it does it. But you're absolutely right. There's a value to celebration. And that doesn't mean everything was right. It doesn't mean that everything was perfect. Yeah. But you find the silver lining because, frankly, it has an effect on your mind. It has an effect on your lived experience, which you get to choose, right? And it affects your microbiome, which affects your physical health over time, right? And so that's thoughts that come to mind, you don't get to control.
Yeah.
How long you hold on to them start to flavor the soup of your life, right? Yeah. If you sample the flavor and don't like it, how are you going to change it? By adding more of what you like until you find the right balance. And that's about inviting thoughts in, right? Focusing in the right spaces, right? And then proactively living, to your point, action, right? Proactively living versus reactively feeling stuck.
Yeah. Well, there's that great idea of we're either, victims or survivors of our childhood. And I know that for even all those tense and painful moments, I am strong and capable and highly independent. And a lot of that is a direct downstream effect of those moments and of that relationship.
We also build some, it's interesting because as a result of those experiences, what we also do is start to create some walls, right? And thresholds that we won't cross or have others cross. Yeah. And we recognize how we can optimize, I think of relationships like a dynamic. And I say every relationship has an optimal distance, right? But in every relationship at different times, there's an optimal distance, right? I always joke with my wife, there are certain times where, being really close is great. Sometimes we need a little distance for harmony and balance, right? Yeah. And that's not unhealthy, right? So people say, but you should always be, it's not the case. And the reality is we all have our lived experiences that formulate, the life we want to make. And we should be aware of that and recognize it and validate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what a pleasure. And we could talk for hours and hours. So that's that much is clear. Where to now? I mean, you have your hands in a number of different things. Obviously, your roles with the Cancer Center and stewarding the young students that are coming through the Upstate program. What is the next, few years or decade of your life hopeful that it'll be focused on?
I mean, it's our community, so I think the next kind of level is, with Upstate at the central space, we've done a lot in transforming. I think our leadership is really good at looking at transforming. Obviously, over the next decade, we anticipate having a new hospital because the one we have is pretty old. So we're working with the state and our friends there to do that. As Central New York grows, the key is to have, again, the hub and spokes model, right? Which is to have an ambulatory health environment that actually promotes health, that helps people to be healthy, and is focused on keeping people in the community, in their homes, versus ending up in the hospital, right? So the current business model is focused on, people being in the hospital because that's where the hospital makes money. But if you have a great ambulatory environment, kind of your, web in the community that spreads health messaging. We've started a teaching kitchen at Upstate with, programming that we'll record and put on our website, et cetera, and then putting messaging out on social media. If we can get to people and teach them how to be well, right? And start there with the school districts, the city school district, friends in town, people you might even know, like Vinnie Lopedale and some of the other people that are very focused on mental health, but also focused on helping children to understand what health promotion really is. The core four, right? If we can get this to the grassroots, we can get this in the community, we start to get into areas that are food deserts to, again, get resources there, fresh produce, et cetera. That's my goal over the next decade. And if we can build that infrastructure, what happens is we leave it better. Now, outcomes we don't control.
Right.
But this input, right, definitely leaves it better as a potential resource of value, right? The universe does this thing. I'm not hung up on the outcomes, right? But I sure as heck want to smile through the journey.
Yeah. Well, what a great enduring message, and an unbelievable and very virtuous goal to have. And, I certainly am hopeful that that's something that is attained because it's a community that I'm a part of. And those are definitely things that I'd love to see not only started, but propagated here. So.
Well, when no is not an option, wonderful possibilities emerge.
I love it. I love it. So where else can people find you if they're looking for more of K-Daddy online? Where can they find you?
So, I do different things. Obviously, through Upstate, they can find me. My books are online, Core 4 of Wellness. And I do speaking, throughout the country as well. Maybe coming to an area near you someday soon, or to the listener. But yeah, I'm accessible even through social media, and I'm happy to connect with people to try to help them. My clinical time obviously is limited because I teach also. So I do a lot more consultations where people can get a lot of this message up front. And I help them live their life out. So I don't want people attached to my office. I want them to be free in their home. With the right information.
Well, you can't be physically in every living room.
That's correct.
But because of the technology that we have at our fingertips, you can be virtually in every living room.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. Well, Kaushal, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for the time that you've spent with us today. It's just fact that none of us can help that we're aging. We can't change that fact. But through mindful choices, applied disciplines, vision and commitment to our future selves, we do have some say in how much life we'll have in those years. Again, this has been the Timeless Podcast presented by Timeless Hearing, a group of healthcare professionals on a mission to convince you that the best moments of your life lie ahead of you, not behind, that your spark, though wavering, can be reignited, your energy restored, and the fullness of both your love and life can be recaptured or possibly redefined. Visit us at timelesshearing.com or any of our area practice locations and come find out how. Thank you so much for your time. If we've enlightened you, sparked your curiosity, or prompted your feedback on how or where we've got it wrong, please comment, share, and follow. Kaushal, have a great afternoon.
You too, my friend.